The room went quiet for a second, then his laughter sliced through it like a blade. "All she got was that dusty old box," my brother jeered, slapping his hand on the table as if he'd just delivered the punchline of a joke. "Don't scroll past this." The moment he mocked me in front of everyone, he unknowingly handed me the key to his downfall. "Watch closely." I didn't flinch. My fingers tightened on the wooden handle of the box resting in my lap, but my face stayed calm. I'd learned long ago that silence unnerves men like him more than shouting ever could. He mistook my stillness for surrender. He always had. It was a brisk autumn afternoon, the kind that carries a chill even indoors. The living room curtains were half drawn, letting in slanted streaks of golden light that caught on the chandelier above. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon. Aunt Ruth had baked a pie earlier, but underneath it lingered the sharper scent of old wood and legal envelopes. Our father's lawyer had just finished reading the will. Everyone had expected it to be straightforward. The house and the company to him, the dutiful son. Something sentimental to me, the quiet one. And when the lawyer slid the modest box across the table toward me, heads turned in unison. My brother's smirk spread before the lawyer even finished speaking. He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, chest puffed out like a rooster. "I guess Dad knew who was actually running things," he said loudly. "House, business, everything, and she gets a box. How fitting." The cousins on the right side of the room snorted. One of my nieces covered her mouth, trying to hide her grin. My sister-in-law gave me a look of mock sympathy. Her eyes said, "Poor thing," even though her lips remained politely pressed together. My heart beat steady. Not fast. Not broken. Just steady. Because while he saw a box, I saw something he'd never understand. I glanced down at it. A rectangular chest of smooth, dark wood, worn at the edges but polished lovingly. I'd seen it before. When I was younger, Dad used to bring it out late at night while everyone else slept. He'd sit at the kitchen table, cleaning something inside with careful hands. He'd never let my brother near it. But he'd let me sit beside him, listening quietly as the clock ticked on. I brushed my thumb across the brass latch, feeling a faint vibration. Taking. Subtle but there. My brother didn't hear it. Of course he didn't. He never listened for anything that wasn't about him. "Say something, won't you?" he taunted. "Or are you too emotional?" I met his gaze slowly, letting the silence stretch long enough to make a few relatives shift in their seats. "I heard everything," I said softly. My voice wasn't shaky, it was measured like a thread pulled tight. He laughed again, louder this time, and others followed. It wasn't cruel laughter, not entirely. More uncomfortable amusement. The kind that happens when people don't want to be on the wrong side of power. He had the house now. The company. They saw him as the one in charge. I simply nodded and placed my palm flat over the box's lid. "Good," I whispered, not to him but to myself. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling papers. "If there are no objections." "Objections?" My brother interrupted, grinning wide. No objections. I'm more than satisfied." He winked at the room, then at me. "Aren't you?" I stood slowly, box in hand. "Completely," I replied. The word hung in the air, heavier than it should have. As I turned toward the doorway, I noticed small details. Tiny, almost unimportant at first glance. My sister-in-law's eyes darting toward the box. My cousin Mark whispering something to his wife while nodding at me. My brother's smug grin faltering for half a second when he saw the way I held it, close but not clutched, like something valuable rather than pitiful. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, painting the porch in long shadows. The wooden steps creaked under my shoes as I walked out, but my mind wasn't on the cold. It was on the ticking I'd felt earlier, and the faint weight distribution inside. It wasn't random junk. Something was in there, deliberate, arranged, waiting. Halfway down the walkway, I heard his voice behind me again. "Hey." I stopped. He strutted out the door like a king dismissing a servant. "Don't take it too hard, sis. Dad just knew who could handle real responsibility." I turned, meeting his eyes head-on. "Responsibility?" "Yeah," he said, spreading his arms toward the house like he owned the world. "Running the business. Maintaining the estate. These things aren't for people who keep trinkets." His glance dropped to the box with a sneer. I stepped closer, not confrontational, just steady. "You're right," I said quietly. "They're not." For a flicker of a moment, confusion crossed his face. He wasn't used to me agreeing with him. Then as quickly as it came, the smugness returned. Glad we're on the same page. I didn't break eye contact. We will be, I replied. And then I walked away. The drive home felt like moving through two worlds. One outside, the fading daylight, neighborhood kids riding bikes, the hum of distant traffic. And one inside, the sound of my heartbeat and that faint ticking coming from the seat beside me. I pulled into my driveway as the streetlights flickered on. My house was smaller, simpler, but mine. I set the box on the kitchen table where the afternoon light had thinned into a soft orange glow. For a moment I didn't open it. I just stared. Memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. My father's quiet smile, the way he'd lift each item carefully from that box, polishing it with his old cloth. Patience, he used to tell me. Patience turns the overlooked into the powerful. Back at the house, my brother was probably pouring champagne, toasting to his new empire. He didn't notice the way some of the relatives watched me leave, not him. He never noticed anything outside his own reflection. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Ruth, my cousin, wrapped in a knitted shawl, cheeks flushed from the cold. She slipped inside without waiting to be invited. I had to see you, she whispered, glancing toward the box. He's already talking about remodeling the study, turning Dad's office into a media room. I pressed my lips together. Of course he is. She hesitated. You're not upset? I met her eyes and smiled faintly. I'm not upset, Ruth. I'm thinking. She studied me for a long moment, then lowered her voice. You always were the quiet one. The one who noticed things. I placed my hand on the box again, fingers brushing the brass latch. The ticking grew louder in the silence between us. Ruth's eyes widened a little. What's in there? She whispered. I exhaled slowly. Something he never cared enough to understand. I didn't elaborate. She didn't press. She just gave my arm a squeeze and left, muttering, I hope you make him eat that grin one day. Later that night, alone at the table, I turned off all the lights except the small lamp overhead. The house was silent except for the faint ticking inside the box. My fingers rested on the latch, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Timing matters. My father taught me that too. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. His laugh replayed in my mind, not as pain anymore but as fuel. When I opened my eyes, I pictured his face from earlier. The way he'd leaned back, certain that the world belonged to him. The way the room had laughed with him, not at him. That would change. Not today. But soon. I traced the edge of the box once more, feeling the smooth wood against my fingertips, and whispered into the quiet room, You have no idea what you've just set in motion. The next morning, as sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor, I stood at the window and watched a delivery truck pull into my brother's driveway across town on the news. They were already talking about him in the community paper. The new head of the family business, the headline said. I smiled, not out of bitterness but because headlines fade. Legacies shift. I turned back to the table. The box waited. And this time I reached for the latch. But before I lifted the lid, I looked out the window one last time. I imagined the look on his face when the world flipped. That image alone steadied my hands. And then click. The click of the latch echoed in my kitchen like a small gunshot. I exhaled slowly, steadying my hands before lifting the lid. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, lay rows of watches, gleaming, intricate, and perfectly arranged just as I remembered. Their faces caught the morning light, scattering tiny reflections across my kitchen walls like silent fireworks. I froze, taking in the sight. It wasn't just the watches, it was the way they were placed. My father had always been meticulous. Each timepiece rested in its original slot, protected by soft cloth and tiny brass dividers. My throat tightened. He hadn't simply left me a box. He'd left me something deliberate. Something planned. The ticking I'd heard earlier was louder now, steady and rhythmic. I picked up the first watch carefully. Its leather strap was worn but strong, and the hand swept across its face in a fluid motion. I turned it over and saw a tiny engraving on the back, for patience, not pride. My breath caught. That was his handwriting, engraved exactly like the notes he used to leave me in my lunchbox when I was a child. I ran my fingers over the words. This wasn't a random gift. This was a message. I made coffee, needing something warm to anchor me. As the kettle hissed and popped, I laid each watch out in neat rows on the table. 51. I counted twice to be sure. Different sizes, styles, and eras. Some had delicate faces like jewelry. Others were sturdy, military-grade pieces with worn straps and dials that looked older than me. Memories flooded in. Me as a teenager sitting at the kitchen table at midnight watching him polish these. He never said much about them, just stories and fragments. This one survived a fire. That one crossed the ocean twice. This one will outlast us all. Back then I hadn't grasped the depth of his attachment. Now seeing them laid out like soldiers on parade I finally did. But sentiment alone didn't explain the weight of this gift. He wasn't a sentimental man, not in that way. He'd chosen me for a reason. I opened my laptop and began searching. My fingers hesitated for a second. I'd never been one to obsess over money. I'd lived simply my entire life. But the sound of my brother's laughter from yesterday cut through that hesitation like a cold wind. I typed in the name engraved on the first watch's face. The search results stunned me. Auction listings. Collectors' forums. Historical archives. That single watch, just one, had recently sold for almost $12,000. My mouth went dry. I checked another. $18,500. Another. $9,200. By the time I finished searching the first 10, I was gripping the edge of the table. These weren't trinkets. This was a treasure trove, carefully curated over decades. I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet, shaky laugh. He had no idea. Around noon my neighbor Helen knocked on my back door. She's been my friend for 30 years. Tough, sharp, always bringing over her famous chicken soup when she sensed something was brewing. She stepped inside carrying a Tupperware container. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, squinting at the table. Her eyes widened. Or, 50 ghosts with very expensive taste. I couldn't help but smile. "It's my father's collection." She set the soup down and walked slowly around the table, hands behind her back as if she were in a museum. These are worth a fortune," she whispered. "I'm starting to realize that," I said. He gave me a long look. "Your brother doesn't know, does he?" I shook my head. "Good," she said firmly, pulling out a chair. "Then you've got the upper hand. Don't waste it." Her words stuck with me long after she left. The upper hand. It had been years since I'd felt like I held anything over my brother. Growing up, he'd been loud, commanding, always the favorite in public. I was the quiet one, the listener. But now, the weight of this box shifted everything. I spent the rest of the afternoon cataloging each watch. I wrote down their engravings, model numbers, unique details. Some had initials carved into the metal. Others carried faded receipts folded inside their cases. It felt less like inventory and more like decoding a hidden message from my father. On the last row, tucked beneath a false bottom, I found something that made me pause. A folded piece of yellowed paper sealed with wax. My hands trembled as I cracked it open. Inside was a handwritten list. Dates, names of collectors, and values. He kept track of everything. Every sale he'd considered, every appraisal he'd received. Some numbers were astonishing. At the bottom of the page, in his unmistakable scrawl, were 4 words. "For the one who waits." I sat there for a long time staring at that sentence. He'd chosen me. He'd seen something in me all those years ago at the kitchen table that my brother never bothered to understand. Patience. Evening settled in, painting the kitchen in a soft amber glow. I made myself a light dinner but barely touched it. My mind was spinning. The watches weren't just valuable, they were strategic. Quiet, unassuming, but powerful in the right hands. I decided to make one call. An old friend, Martin, who used to run a small antique store downtown. He picked up on the second ring. "Martin, it's me," I said. Well, he replied warmly. "It's been ages. What brings you back to the land of ticking clocks?" "Something you might appreciate," I said. "I have a collection I'd like your eyes on. My father's." He whistled softly. "If it's your father's, I'm intrigued. Bring one by tomorrow. Let's have a look." "I'll bring 3, I said before hanging up. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint ticking from the kitchen. It wasn't loud enough to keep me awake. It was just present, steady. Like a reminder. I thought of my brother's grin as he waved the house keys around. The way the family's laughter echoed like I was the punchline. They all saw me walk away with a dusty box. Not one of them thought twice about it. Good. Let them underestimate me. The next morning I wrapped 3 watches carefully in cloth and placed them in my purse. I locked the rest in a fireproof chest in the back of my closet. As I drove into town, I rehearsed what I'd say to Martin. No lies, just careful truths. Enough to get his honest assessment. His shop hadn't changed in years. The bell above the door gave its familiar cheerful jingle when I stepped in. Dust motes floated in the sunlight that poured through the front windows. Shelves lined with old clocks, jewelry, and trinkets greeted me like old friends. Martin came out from the back wearing his usual cardigan and thick glasses. "Well, if it isn't the quiet one," he said with a grin. I smiled faintly. "Quiet doesn't mean idle." He raised an eyebrow. "I like the sound of that. Let's see what you've got." I placed the first watch on the counter. His grin vanished. He picked it up with reverent hands, turned it over, adjusted his glasses and muttered, "Good Lord." One by one I showed him the other 2. His face grew more serious with each piece. When he finally looked up, his voice was low. "Do you have any idea what you're sitting on?" "I'm starting to," I said. He leaned in closer. "These aren't just collector's items. This is a legacy. A silent fortune. You could sell just these 3 and pay off a house." I stayed calm, but inside, a slow current of power surged through me. "I don't intend to sell them all," I said carefully. His eyes narrowed, impressed. "Good. Because if you play this right, you'll hold every card in your hand before he even realizes the game's begun." When I returned home, I placed the 3 watches back carefully. The kitchen felt different now. The box wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a weapon. A quiet one. A patient one. I looked at the list again. For the one who waits. I wasn't just going to wait. I was going to build. As night fell, I locked the box away once more, this time not with uncertainty but with intention. My brother thought the inheritance had been decided. He was wrong. The real legacy was ticking in my kitchen all along. And I was just getting started. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, striping the kitchen table where the box had sat the night before. I'd tucked it safely away, but its presence lingered like a quiet heartbeat in the house. The list my father had left me lay unfolded beside my coffee cup, edges curled from the night's humidity. I traced the names and numbers with my fingertip as the kettle whistled, my mind sharp despite the early hour. Across town, my brother was likely hosting another breakfast strategy meeting. He loved playing the role of the new patriarch. I could almost picture him, sitting at the head of the dining table, gesturing grandly with a butter knife as relatives and opportunists leaned in, hanging on every word. He was always louder in the mornings, like a rooster announcing himself to the world. I smiled faintly. Let him brag. Noise makes people careless. And I had no intention of making noise. By late morning, my plan was already taking its first quiet steps. I drove to Martin's shop again, this time with a different purpose. The small bell jingled as I entered, and the warm, dusty smell of old wood and polish wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. "You're back fast," Martin said, looking up from a grandfather clock he was fixing. "I need more than appraisals," I said calmly. "I need connections." His eyes lit up with curiosity. "Connections. Buyers. Serious ones. And discreet ones," I replied. He studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Your father would have liked that tone," he said. "All right. I'll make some calls. But you should know, pieces like these can cause a stir in collector circles. If word gets out too fast." "It won't," I interrupted gently. "I don't intend to sell everything. Just enough to build something solid." He smiled, impressed. "I'll reach out to 2 people. Trustworthy. Old money. No drama. You'll hear from them within the week." I left the shop with a small thrill running beneath my calm exterior. It wasn't the thrill of greed. It was strategy. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to my brother's world. I was building my own. Meanwhile, he made sure the whole town knew he was in charge. Flyers for a company relaunch event arrived in everyone's mailboxes. He replaced the old sign outside the factory with one bearing his name in bold letters. He even hosted a lunch at the community center, shaking hands, making speeches, pretending he'd earned it all. Helen called me after attending the lunch out of curiosity. "I swear," she said, "he was strutting around like a politician. Someone even asked him about you and he laughed it off. Said you were, what was the word? Sentimental." My jaw tightened but my voice stayed even. Let him keep thinking that. Oh, I intend to, Helen replied with a chuckle. He's building his castle out loud. You're laying bricks in silence. I know which one lasts longer. A few days later, I received a call from one of Martin's contacts. Her name was Evelyn, a quiet, well-spoken woman who collected timepieces like others collected rare books. She invited me to meet her at a small cafe downtown. She arrived precisely on time, wearing a navy wool coat and gloves that looked older than both of us combined. She didn't waste time with small talk. Martin tells me you have something special, she said, her eyes sharp behind delicate glasses. I unwrapped one of the watches carefully and placed it on the table between us. She leaned in, her breath fogging the glass, and examined it like a jeweler studying a diamond. This belonged to your father? She asked. Yes. And you're looking to sell, selectively? I nodded. Her lips curved slightly. Good. People who rush lose everything. People who wait, well, they shape their fate. I liked her immediately. By the end of the meeting, she'd agreed to purchase 2 pieces for a significant sum, more than I'd made in years combined. But more importantly, she offered something far more valuable: introductions. Collectors trust discretion, she said. You handle this with patience and you'll have every door open to you. When I left the cafe, the chill in the air felt different. Awake. The wheels were turning. Back at home, I carefully deposited the money into a separate account, one my brother didn't know existed. I'd opened it quietly years ago for emergencies. It had sat mostly untouched. Now it was my foundation. With each watch I chose to sell, I wasn't just raising funds. I was building leverage. The company my brother inherited was public enough that shares could be bought, quietly through third parties without attracting his attention. He was too focused on his speeches and house renovations to notice small shifts on the shareholder registry. My lawyer friend, Denise, helped me navigate the paperwork. She was a sharp woman in her 70s with a no-nonsense tone that could silence a room. We'd met through church years ago. She didn't ask for explanations, just listened carefully as I laid out the essentials. You're not doing anything illegal, she said. In fact, this is clean. Just make sure you don't get sentimental. I won't, I replied. Weeks passed and my brother's voice grew louder while mine stayed quiet. He threw elaborate dinners at the house, hosted charity events, and gave interviews about continuing Dad's legacy. Each headline made me chuckle. He believed visibility equaled control. But in the world of business, control belonged to those who understood the numbers, not the microphones. I started buying shares through 2 trusted intermediaries. One was a retired accountant I knew from my volunteer work. The other was Martin's nephew who dabbled in investments. Each purchase was modest on its own, but together they formed a growing stake. I kept meticulous records, storing everything in a locked filing cabinet beside the box. During this time I noticed something interesting: cracks forming in his golden facade. Whispers from employees reached my ears through neighbors and old friends. Late paychecks. Confused decisions. Meetings where he showed up unprepared. One evening, while picking up groceries, I ran into Maria, an accountant from the company I'd known for years. She leaned close in the produce aisle and whispered, "He's in over his head. He doesn't even understand the quarterly reports. Denise used to help your father review them. He refuses help." I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. "Thank you for telling me." "He thinks being loud is the same as being smart," she muttered before slipping away. By mid-season, I'd secured enough shares to have a noticeable, though still quiet, presence in the company. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't even tell Helen the full extent. Power, I'd learned, grows strongest in silence. One afternoon, as I sat reviewing papers in my kitchen, the phone rang. It was him. His voice was as loud as ever, but there was an edge beneath it. "I hear you've been busy," he said. I kept my tone mild. "Busy? I tend my garden, read, keep myself occupied." "Funny," he said sharply. "Some people mention seeing you around town. Meetings. Strange for someone who got just a box." I smiled to myself. "It's amazing what you can do with a box, isn't it?" He scoffed. "Whatever. Just stay out of the company's way. I have plans." "I'm sure you do," I replied evenly. When I hung up, my pulse was steady. He suspected, but he didn't know. And that was exactly where I wanted him. Off balance, uncertain. Spring arrived with the sound of birds and the quiet hum of a plan nearing its next stage. My brother continued his loud performance. Fundraisers, interviews, dinner parties, while I kept layering foundations beneath him. He was building a house of cards. I was laying bricks. I met Evelyn twice more, each time selecting a few watches to part with. She introduced me to a small network of collectors who valued discretion above all. Every transaction was clean, quiet, and strategic. With each sale, my financial power grew. With each share purchase, my influence expanded. I wasn't rushing. I was building. And he still hadn't realized that while he bragged to the world, the real shift was happening silently, watch by watch, share by share, behind the closed doors of my modest kitchen. The ticking box wasn't just a gift anymore. It was the cornerstone of something bigger. And soon, the noise he loved so much would be the very thing that blinded him. The invitation arrived the next day, gold embossed and unnecessarily thick, as if weight could make it more important. My brother's handwriting scrawled across the bottom, "I expect to see you there." It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. His annual company gala. His moment to shine under the chandelier. I held the card between my fingers, running my thumb over the raised lettering. It smelled faintly of expensive ink and arrogance. 4 years, this event had been my father's way of quietly honoring the company's achievements. Now it was just another stage for my brother to parade on. I pinned the invitation to the fridge door and stared at it over my morning coffee. He thought I'd come to clap politely in the corner like I always had. He thought I'd be the quiet, invisible sister, watching him bask in his stolen glory. He was wrong. The following week was a quiet storm behind my closed doors. Every evening I sat at the kitchen table, papers and ledgers spread out like a map. Denise, my lawyer friend, came by twice. She brought her reading glasses and her dry wit. "You do realize," she said one night, tapping her pen against a contract, "this could flip everything upside down if you time it right." "I know," I replied, eyes steady. "That's exactly why I'm not rushing." She chuckled. "That's the thing about loud men, they always think time is their weapon. It's ours." While he rehearsed speeches in front of mirrors, I finalized paperwork. While he ordered new floral centerpieces and staged rehearsals, I met quietly with board members and key shareholders over tea and sandwiches. Some of them were old family friends, others were simply tired of his reckless bravado. "You're your father's daughter," one of them told me during a quiet lunch. He listened. He planned. He didn't bark orders. I didn't need them to love me. I just needed them to vote when the time came. The night of the gala arrived cold and crisp, the kind of evening where every sound carries. I stood in front of my mirror adjusting the simple black dress I'd chosen. It wasn't flashy, but it was elegant. My mother's pearl earrings caught the soft lamplight. My heart beat steadily, not from nerves but focus. This wasn't revenge born of rage. This was strategy finally stepping into the light. When I pulled into the company's parking lot, cars lined the front like a showroom. Sleek, polished, expensive. The building glowed with warm light, and through the glass doors I could see clusters of guests in glittering attire, their laughter mingling with the faint hum of a string quartet. I stepped inside. Heads turned. A few whispers followed me as I moved through the crowd, quiet but composed. Helen found me near the entrance, a mischievous smile playing on her face. "You look like you're about to conduct an orchestra," she whispered. "In a way," I said, taking a glass of water from a passing server. "I am." He made his grand entrance 20 minutes later, as expected. My brother loved late arrivals. He thought they made him look important. He stood at the top of the staircase, hands spread wide, soaking in the applause like sunlight. "Welcome everyone," he boomed. His voice carried across the room, bouncing off the marble floors and glass walls. Cameras flashed as he descended the stairs, stopping to shake hands, clap backs, and flash his signature grin. I stood near the far end of the room, watching carefully. Every detail mattered. The way he strutted. The way people leaned toward him for approval. The way he relished it all, blind to how fragile it truly was. The program began, speeches, music, wine. Guests mingled under chandeliers. But I wasn't here for polite conversation. Denise stood near the side door, subtly nodding at me. The board members I'd spoken to earlier were scattered through the room, each in their usual places as if nothing was different. And then, as planned, the lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated my brother as he took the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we celebrate legacy, my father's legacy, and the bright future of this company under my leadership." I almost laughed out loud at the emphasis. He was so predictable. He spoke of vision, of innovation, of family. His speech was rehearsed to the point of sterility. He thanked everyone but mentioned me only once, in passing, like an afterthought. "And of course," he said, gesturing vaguely toward my corner, "my sister who received a special keepsake." His grin stretched. "We all know she treasures sentimental things." Laughter rippled through the room. I met his eyes across the stage and held his gaze. My expression didn't change. But something in mine made his falter for half a second. He cleared his throat and continued. When he finished, polite applause filled the air. The lights shifted slightly, signaling the start of the evening's presentations. This was usually the moment for financial slides and projections. A boring formality my father had always kept brief. But tonight I had arranged something different. Denise gave the signal. A technician in the back, already briefed, switched the presentation feed to a different file. My file. The first slide appeared on the giant screen behind him. A photograph of a watch. My father's watch. One of the 51. The image was crisp and clear, filling the entire backdrop. A murmur rippled through the audience. My brother turned, confused. "What is this?" he whispered into the mic, forgetting to switch it off. His voice echoed awkwardly. The second slide appeared. Another watch with its name and appraised value listed beneath. Gasps followed. The third slide showed a series of watches, one after another, accompanied by historical notes and sale records. Their combined value appeared at the bottom in bold numbers. It climbed with each reveal. $25,000, $90,000, $210,000. I stepped onto the stage from the side aisle. Not rushing. Just walking steadily, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The crowd parted instinctively. My brother's smile had frozen. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath as I joined him at the microphone. "Presenting legacy," I said simply. The next slide displayed my father's handwriting. "For the one who waits." The room fell completely silent. I turned toward the audience. "My father didn't leave me scraps," I began, voice clear and calm. "He left me history. He left me something built with patience, something this company was founded on." And while noise filled these halls, I glanced at my brother. Some of us were still listening. People leaned forward. The room had shifted. It wasn't his stage anymore. It was ours. I clicked to the next slide. Financial documentation. The sale of select watches. The investments made. The percentage of company shares now in my possession. A board member stood up near the back, adjusting his glasses as he read the figures. My brother stammered, This is out of context." "No," I said gently but firmly. "This is exactly in context." The final slide of my presentation appeared. The official board notice. A meeting had been held earlier that day, quietly, legally, and thoroughly. The signatures of every voting member were there. A resolution to remove him as CEO effective immediately. Murmurs turned into gasps. Someone actually clapped once before stopping themselves. Denise stepped forward from the side of the room, handing out printed copies to key attendees. Everything had been timed perfectly. My brother's face had lost all its color. He looked out at the room, searching for allies, but found none. All the applause he had courted, all the admiration he had demanded, it scattered like dry leaves in the wind. I turned back to the microphone. "Tonight," I said softly, "isn't about endings. It's about remembering who we are. And who built this company on more than just noise." The applause that followed wasn't polite this time. It was real. He stood frozen beside me, hands gripping the podium. For a moment he looked like a child caught in a lie. Cameras flashed. People whispered. His throne, built on volume and vanity, cracked beneath his feet in real time. I didn't look at him again. I didn't need to. I stepped off the stage slowly as the applause swelled behind me. Evelyn, the collector, was in the audience. She raised her glass to me from her table, a small, knowing smile on her face. Helen met me near the exit, eyes wide. She exhaled. "You just pulled the ground out from under him." I glanced over my shoulder once. He was still standing there, stunned, clinging to a microphone that no longer carried his voice. Not yet, I said quietly. Almost. Because the real blow, the one he'd never recover from, was still waiting. The applause was still echoing when I stepped out into the cool night air. The gala hall behind me buzzed with chatter and confusion. Guests were already piecing together what had just happened. Some were stunned, some thrilled, some scrambling to adjust their loyalties. I could feel the shift in the air like the moment before a storm breaks. I walked slowly down the marble steps, the night breeze tugging at the hem of my black dress. From the open doors behind me I heard his voice, strained now, no longer booming. He was cornered by board members and lawyers, their polite tones carrying the weight of finality. For years he had been the center of every room. Now he was just another man standing beneath bright lights with nowhere to run. The next morning, the front page of the local business paper told the story before he could control the narrative. CEO removed during annual gala. Sister reveals hidden legacy. There was a photo of me at the microphone mid-sentence, calm and composed. In the corner of the same page, a smaller image showed him frozen on stage, mouth slightly open, like a man waking up to find his castle washed away overnight. Helen showed up on my porch with coffee and the paper folded under her arm. She didn't knock, she never did. She just let herself in and set the paper down in front of me with a satisfied grin. "You made quite the splash," she said. I smiled faintly. I didn't need to shout. He did that for me. She leaned back in the chair. He's furious, you know. Spent half the night making calls to anyone who would listen. But the board's already moving forward. It's over. I stirred sugar into my coffee slowly. No. It's just beginning. Because while everyone else saw public humiliation, I knew what they didn't. His empire wasn't just his reputation. It was built on shaky finances, unpaid taxes, and arrogance. I hadn't revealed everything at the gala. That was the show. What came next was the reality. By noon, his lawyer called mine, voice clipped and defensive. "He wants to contest the board's decision," Denise told me over the phone, sounding almost amused. "Of course he does," I said. "He doesn't have a legal leg to stand on," she added. "His mismanagement is documented. The board's vote was unanimous. And the transfer of controlling shares is airtight." I looked out the kitchen window, watching a pair of birds fight over a piece of bread on the lawn. "Let him try," I murmured. "Every hour he spends fighting is an hour he watches everything slip through his fingers." A few days later, I returned to the company building, not as a guest this time but as the new chairwoman. The parking lot was half full. Some employees lingered outside, whispering. As I walked past, their conversations fell into hushes. I wasn't dressed for power, just a gray coat, sensible shoes, and a calm expression, but their eyes followed me with a mix of curiosity and relief. The boardroom felt different now. The long wooden table that had once intimidated me now felt like familiar ground. The portraits of past leaders lined the walls, my father's among them. For a brief second, my gaze lingered on his picture. I hoped he would have approved of this moment, not for the power but for the patience it took to get here. Denise joined me along with 2 senior board members. Papers were signed. Votes were finalized. The leadership transition became official. And then the doors opened and he walked in. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically but in the way arrogance deflates when the spotlight moves elsewhere. His tie was loose, his hair slightly unkempt, things he never would have tolerated a month ago. His eyes locked on mine. "I hope you're enjoying yourself," he spat, his voice low but sharp. I remained seated, pen still in hand. "I'm not here to enjoy myself. I'm here to fix what you broke." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me? You sat in the background your whole life while I built everything." "You didn't build anything," I said quietly. "You performed. There's a difference." He slammed his palm against the table. "You humiliated me. In front of everyone." I met his anger with calm. "No. You did that all by yourself." I just held up the mirror. For a moment something raw flickered across his face. Fear, maybe. Then he straightened his shoulders and sneered. "You won't last 6 months." I leaned forward slightly. "Watch me." Over the following weeks, the reality of his downfall unfolded piece by piece. Creditors began to call. Taxes he had ignored came due. Renovation projects at the house were halted halfway, leaving walls torn open and contractors unpaid. The people who once toasted him at dinners now avoided his calls. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding the company with quiet, deliberate steps. Evelyn connected me with new investors who respected the legacy of patience and precision my father had instilled. Maria, the accountant, returned to work with a sigh of relief, finally free to implement the systems my brother had ignored. Employees who had been afraid to speak under his leadership began to come forward with ideas, concerns, and gratitude. Helen would visit occasionally and shake her head in disbelief. "You've turned this place around in weeks," she said one afternoon as we walked through the refurbished lobby. "No," I replied, looking up at the company's modest but proud sign. "I just listened to what was already broken and fixed it piece by piece." One crisp morning I received a formal notice. He was selling the house. The debt had swallowed him faster than he anticipated. The mansion that once symbolized his triumph now stood half-renovated, cold and echoing, waiting for buyers. I drove past it quietly one afternoon. Through the iron gates I saw him standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, staring at the yard like he didn't recognize it anymore. For a moment I almost felt a pang of pity. Almost. But pity was the language of the past. The present had no space for it. The final twist came unexpectedly simple. During one of the audits my team conducted, we discovered that he had used personal funds to cover company gaps, short-term patches that left him personally liable. He hadn't understood the legal consequences of blurring those lines. I didn't expose him publicly. I didn't need to. The lawyers handled it quietly. One morning his assets, what little remained, were legally frozen. He called me that afternoon. "You did this," he said, voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "No," I said softly. "You did this when you thought noise was power. You just didn't hear the ticking underneath." He was silent on the other end for a long time. Then, almost inaudibly, he whispered, "You waited." "Yes," I replied. "And while you bragged, I built." I hung up before he could respond. Months passed. The company stabilized under my leadership. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly the cracks closed. Investors returned. Employees found their rhythm. The watches I hadn't sold were placed in a secure display in the company's main lobby, not as trophies but as reminders. Each one gleamed under the soft lights, ticking steadily. Visitors often stopped to look at them, unaware that those silent timepieces had toppled an empire. On quiet evenings I'd sit in my kitchen with a cup of tea, the original box back on the table where it had started. Its velvet interior was emptier now, but its purpose had been fulfilled. Helen would join me sometimes, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied sigh. "You didn't just get revenge," she said once. "You built something better out of the rubble." I smiled. He was so loud he never heard what silence can do. The last time I saw him, it wasn't at a courtroom or a company meeting. It was at a small diner on the edge of town. He was sitting alone by the window, staring into a half-empty cup of coffee. The weight of his choices sat heavy on his shoulders. He didn't notice me walk in. I stood for a moment, watching quietly, and then turned to leave. There was nothing left to say. The revenge was complete, not in flames, not in a scream, but in the quiet way his empire had dissolved while mine had taken root. As I drove home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ticking of the one watch I kept on my wrist was steady, grounding. I'd waited my whole life to be heard, not by shouting louder but by letting silence do the work. His empire fell in noise. Mine rose in silence. If this story made your heart race or your hands clench, hit subscribe. More real, dark, emotional revenge stories are waiting, because silence has power and I'm not done telling it.